Nous vous entendons.
Okay. So thank you very much to the previous speakers, and I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share our thoughts with you. I have to be very honest with you and tell you that as activists on the African continent, we are extremely angry about, the state of our continent. This weekend, I just spent a little bit of time looking at the number of conflicts on the continent. There are about 25 conflicts going on our continent. These are all linked inextricably to the plundering of our natural resources. It's inextricably linked to the lack of democracy on the continent and the oppression of our people. So what I want to say very clearly is that when we're looking at food systems in Africa, and Mamadou gave a very good overview of how smallholder farmers are struggling under the most inhumane conditions. And they're still putting food on the table, they're still conserving their resources, they're still keeping their cultures intact. And I want us to look at what's going on our continent very, 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 very openly. And I want to start off by saying that when we're looking at the issue of food and food systems in Africa, we need to have an appropriate and holistic political framing. And here we have to be very honest about the various agribusiness and the various interventions being made and have been made since colonial times on the continent that support the current industrial system from which we are all benefiting, and in particular, people in the north. I think we need to be very clear about this. We need to be very clear, and we can see this, that there's an interconnectedness between the political and economic drivers at play in the climate change, deforestation, industrial agriculture, and extractivist exploitation of the continent. Here I'm talking about oil, gas, and our minerals, and their various roles in driving social and political instability on our continent and food insecurity. And this has a huge role to play in fueling the systemic existential crisis we as humans are facing globally. So I think we must be very clear. Development interventions coming even from the government of France, from Europe, the US, and our own governments, they are all complicit, without any exception, to reinforcing Africa's indebtedness. We will never be able to pay our loans, I'm telling you now, because we are tied in perpetuity to the World Bank and IMF. So if we don't talk about indebtedness, we can't talk about a future for us, okay? The inequalities and social exclusion in Africa are entrenched through indebtedness. They deepen our dependency on destructive, short-lived fossil fuel and capital-intensive projects. Nnimmo knows this. He spent most of his life fighting the oil industry and the global agriculture and forest value chains. Come on, take a look at our forests. Take a look at our continent. Look at it. Come on, man. There has to be some fundamental changes. We've looked at the conditions that have given rise to extreme vulnerabilities of our communities to shocks, locusts, fall armyworm, cyclones, COVID, Ebola. I mean, it just sounds like a catastrophe, and it is. So we want to say very clearly, the World Bank has been instrumental in securing large tracts of lands for agribusiness from France, from the US, from Canada, from the UK, China. This is private development. This development is dispossessing our smallholder farmers. How can we talk about the future of food when we don't want to talk about what is going on our continent and how it's dispossessing our people? Foraging grounds are being taken away from our people for mining, for logging, industrial agriculture, pipelines. There's a pipeline project from Uganda that will go right through Tanzania, through 10 to 15,000 smallholder farmers. What are we saying about this? For example, I don't think we must be, shy to make the linkages between the various extractive so-called development interventions happening, and our governments are complicit, not only in the North Africa as well, and I'll come to it. Another major issue for us is the global finance involved in the expansion of agribusiness and monoculture plantations, which once were historically associated with loans and credits. But now the pace and scale of finance capitalism in agriculture has reached new heights, and it's promoting the dispossession of rural people and communities from their territories. Consequently, what is happening to smallholder farmers? They are ending up as contract farmers, landless people, working on mines, working on monoculture productions as poorly paid and exploited laborers. So there are extreme pressures on the livelihoods of our farmers and from armed conflict. We must talk about the conflict on the continent and its role in keeping Africa resource poor. Are we telling everyone we have come to a moment in our history that we are no longer prepared to accept the situation? The armed conflict is closely linked, as I said, to the extractive sector and the lack of democracy on the continent. Now, we are particularly concerned. Now, there are a number of new threats coming to us, okay, from the northern-based conservation groups in regard to fortress conservation solutions. They are pushing things like the 30 by 30 targets. This is going to cause more dispossession. Then there are new projects that are based on old failed market mechanisms, the old REDD+ projects, which have already failed to tackle deforestation, emissions, and biodiversity loss. These have continuously failed to reduce carbon emissions. They have not sequestered any carbon from the atmosphere. And they have led to even more biodiversity loss and industrial agriculture expansion, urbanization, increased consumption patterns. And they have simply allowed the business as usual model to continue and deepening and accelerating our converging crisis. African governments, we have seen what they are doing internationally. They are deeply embedded in this whole green economics discussion, circular, and this whole bioeconomic discussion, as we see, is just repurposing of old and outdated market and technology-based instruments, entrenched in capitalism and an overutilization of environmental resources in Africa, ecosystems and sinks commodification and instrumentalization of nature under the guise of nature protection, spatial exclusion, and so on.
Exclusion spatiale, etc.
So I think that, if we want to talk about food systems, we want to talk about the future of smallholder farming in Africa, we cannot talk about this without looking at all the issues that I've outlined. If we're really sincere about it, then we need to disrupt neo-colonial policies that are related to international trade and investment, and are implicit in national policies around land use, tenure systems, and concession models. Because I think that our mainstay fights are very, very crucial to smallholder farmers, to peasant farmers. We spoke to farmers in the DRC yesterday. They were, they are, such beautiful people. They are still patient. They are still positive. And we know what's happened to the DRC. But they're still arguing for the protection of farmers' rights, agriculturally biodiverse farmer seed systems, re-establishing farmer-to-farmer linkages. They are still committed wholeheartedly to agroecology. And we have to listen to them. But we need to be very clear that we need to fight the battles that we need to fight if we're going to have if our children and the unborn are going to have any future on this continent. There are issues around repetitive and chronic food aid and seed aid that completely displace local seed and food systems. The World Food Programme won a Nobel Prize. In this pandemic and multiple shocks, we are afraid that we will end up dependent on food aid and our people totally dispossessed. So there is a focus on if we're going to focus on recovery efforts, reconstruction efforts, then we must listen to the farmers, and they're saying very clearly local socio-ecological systems of which farmer seeds are a crucial component must be strongly supported. But at the global level, cooperation is needed to prohibit illicit financial flows and tax evasion of companies operating in the global south. These are rapaciously promoting the extraction of our natural resources, which quite frankly, we cannot afford anymore. We cannot afford it anymore. Our ecological base has been depleted and we are paying the price, and we're saying we can't do it anymore. People from the north, we can't do it anymore. We are very sorry. Large-scale projects on the horizon will fail, like this gas projects in Mozambique, for example. Rather, they will maintain power for the political elite. They will prevent transformation on the ground. It cannot happen. We cannot transition to agroecology. It will not be able to happen. We cannot scale it up. There's no government support for it. And they will plunge countries like Mozambique further into unsustainable debt and deepen our ecological crisis. This is happening all across the continent. Nnimmo can talk about it. Cameroon, Nigeria, DRC, Uganda, Tanzania, and the list goes on. So we need to scrutinize how investments are made, in which sectors, who will benefit from it. And we are thus calling for global cooperation, as I've said, to elicit financial flows. It's not enough for you to support us in agroecology in the north. It's not enough. I'm very sorry to tell you this. The current system cannot continue anymore. If we continue, we will have more zoonotic spillovers, that's for sure. If you want more pandemics, at least if you want the north to be clear of pandemics, then at least you have to pay attention to what your companies are doing in our countries. So I want to leave it there and say that we are beyond angry. We want to fight back, and our future will lie in our cooperation as Africans. We will fight back and form a strong Pan-African resistance. And we will not stop, because we will fight with everything we have for the future of our children. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.
Wow, Marian, I must thank you for speaking from your heart and for covering such a wide, broad range of basic issues that are making it impossible, that have erected very strong walls against the efforts of smallholder farmers who are feeding the continent of Africa. And we could extend by saying that these are the same people who are feeding the world. I thank on behalf of myself and Lucas, I must thank all the presenters. You have given us a lot of food for thought. I'm sure there are a lot of questions from participants that are getting ready to come. We've done very well for time. In fact, we still had about 9 more minutes before question time. And so let me just bring up a few of the questions that came into my heart, not questions, some of the comments that you made, starting from Marian, of course, because she made the last point, so that it freshes in my heart. She mentioned the fact that there are 25 ongoing conflicts on the continent of Africa, and these are all connected to the plundering of resources, and of course manifest in all kinds of political discrimination, economic oppression, and they just destabilize the food system. And the question has been, Marian has clearly shown the interconnectedness of all these factors. Is something that Mamadou was stressing on, and how the World Bank has been instrumental to dispossession of farmers of their land, land grabbing, for mining, for pipelines, and for extractive activity, other extractive activities. And the more this financing continues to directly affect food production and access to food and the kind of food, the kind of laws that are made by our governments governing resource management and who these resources can benefit. In other words, we're having a very neo-colonial construct on the continent, and one would say the same. This also is inescapable when you're running a neoliberal system globally. Muriel really touched my heart with, she spoke about nutrition. Of course, she's a nutritionist. And I like the way you turn the question, who does the planet feed and who feeds the planet? And of course, I think this is, we have to look at both ways. And the more, when we feed the planet, of course, the planet feeds us. So if we don't feed the planet, if we harm the system that supports food, then we are really, really in a big, deep problem. And, you know, there's a picture of the farmer that you, I believe you're talking about the unsupported small-scale farmers who do a lot of work and earn little, but are the same people who are feeding the world, who are giving us fresh food at the street corner market, at the village market, in the urban markets. These are the people who are doing all the work and feeding the world. I think Mamadou mentioned that less than 30% of the food that's been produced in the world today goes through the global chain, which means 70% of the food actually is operating outside of the chain. And this is the food that's been produced by small-scale farmers using very little resources, but feeding the world at the same time and not being supported. And, you know, kind of criminal neglect of these farmers who are feeding us. Starting out today, Arthur actually brought up a lot of points that I think maybe questions from participants about how agriculture affects biodiversity and it's leading some to extinction and some being responsible for 80% of deforestation. I guess that, of course, that is referring to colonial industrial agriculture, monoculture agriculture, not the small scale agriculture, I think, because you gave the example of oil palm and soy plantations and dependence on fossil fuels. And so the question is for us today, open to all participants from all parts of the world who have joined us in this school of the Anthropocene to bring up your questions and comments, your questions, and then the participants could be addressed directly, otherwise they could answer. I see one question in French. Unfortunately, maybe the interpreters can read this comment de le continent africain.
Je vais lire la question, Nnimmo, si vous le voulez bien.
I will read the question, Nnimmo. First question. First question asked how Africa can regain the land and its future, a political solution or new economic model.
Right, so we open that to the participant, the panelists, to please go ahead and tackle that question.
Can I jump on?
Oui, bien sûr, Mamadou Goïta.
Please go ahead.
OK. Je pense qu'il y a plusieurs voies par lesquelles
I think there are many different ways we can take, and I think that some countries are trying to regain part of this heritage. So the first point is to raise awareness about the fact that we are changing, because some political leaders haven't understood that these resources, that is the basis of the production system and their economy, the resources are going to other hands and will change the economic model. So awareness has to be risen. Second point, we have to reform public policies because there should defend the resources and prioritize the access to those resources to the local people. It doesn't mean that we are lethargic, country by country, and we are nationalist, but there are challenges, what is at stake, geopolitical points that forces us to change public policies in order for them to protect the producers, in order to feed the planet, and to develop models that would integrate such dimension. In Mali, for instance, we are redesigning the public policies connected with access to resources. We are changing land policies in Mali. We have, and we started in 2010, I worked on that. From 2010 to 2014, we changed a new farming policy. And we chose certain visions of the model we wanted to develop, which we translated this into law, and the access to resources is the priority of family farming. But because of this dimension today, we've got land use commissions locally that can work upstream and downstream for any land litigation. So the evolution of public policies, and also I think we should change the financial scheme supporting farming. So some states are just enabled for 1 million euros that could be used to land planning. Some state cannot use such schemes to help people to have access of these resources, and such states should stop existing. So public investment today should be directed to helping these people to have access to the resources. And this is the purpose of this change. And for 2 years in Mali, we have worked on a new seed policy that, for the first time, acknowledges that there are 2 seed systems living together, and more than 13% of the seeds come from the farming system, so they're not in catalogs. They have such a potential, reproductive potential, very interesting, and they have been integrated into the Malian law. So we give the possibility to people to use such seeds, although they are not registered. So we acknowledge the existence of natural seeds, farmers' seeds. We understand that they're good for productivity, so such seeds are officially recognized, because before, people could go to jail for using seeds that were not sold in catalogs. So we are going out at the moment from such a scheme. So we protect local farmers, and we should invest 15% of the national budget for agriculture, and part of the agriculture the farming budget should be oriented to research in order to support local seeds. So these are political shifts, very strong ones, that could lead to good results. So we have to have a strong political will and to have coherent programs with new policies and a connection between what can be done nationally and what can be done to accompany production systems downstream and upstream. And all the partnerships respecting all the political reforms. In order to widen a bit, to scale up the answer, we can see more and more the concept of food sovereignty. The urban school is interested by the role that cities can play. So food autonomy, that is sought after by some cities. So anyone can react. How can we define autonomy and sovereignty regarding food? I'm not a specialist, but the food system is only interconnected. So is sovereignty or autonomy the way for a territory to regain its independence? But at the same time, we should, I think, avoid nationalism. So what can we say about sovereignty and autonomy when we speak about food? I can have a try. Mamadou has already spoken and clearly spoken and said part of the response is saying that food sovereignty being the ability of people to choose what they want to eat, how they will produce it, and what are the farming policies that have to be organized. So when we speak about food autonomy, we speak more about the physical ability to produce enough food and different types of food for feeding the local people. So food sovereignty is wider and also speaks about the ability of people to manage themselves the food issue. And if we define food sovereignty, it's interesting to see that even in countries that are industrialized with productivism, such as France, in the farming sector, we also speak about food sovereignty because as consumers in the territories, the regions, we think we can choose, but we cannot really choose because all the different evolutions, all the evolution of the food system doesn't allow us to choose what we eat. And consumers sometimes are in areas where they have not enough, a small variety of food. Different reasons also for issues, speculation, for instance, on food, on financial markets, land grabbing, forcing a food industrial model that is inspired by the colonial approach, monoculture, for instance, or producing production of exotic food, saying that it would be better for a country to get specialized on a specific production in order to export and then import the food they needed for their people and to make sure that there is food safety and the absence of added value in the production territories because you don't have all the transformation chain of the food products. So it's interesting to see that if you see chocolate or cocoa or any tropical exporting products, all the transformation and export industries are in the Western world, and they take advantage of the products, but the added value doesn't happen in the producing country. And they've also spoken of the lack of public policies or wrong public policies. So at the end of the day, we can say that this is for the benefit of a global effective production, answering the basic needs, but there is still undernutrition and malnutrition in the world. So the point of the system is not to feed the people, but to overproduce. Multinational companies have a direct interest in overproducing, even creating completely unfair competition with southern food production. So it's not that we don't produce enough, we produce too much to feed the planet. 2 billion people are overweight, and 700 million people are obese, and 1/3 of cereals on Earth are used for feeding animals. 2/3 of the lands on Earth are used for breeding animals. So this is part of a model feeding the profits, the interests of private players, and it's not even ethical or moral. A private player is a machine that tries to buy as less money for small money and sell for big money, even if that entails obesity. So our system that is shown to be modern, productivist, is completely dysfunctioning. More than half of the people eat too much or don't eat the right food, and we don't even have the figures because the situation is so bad that it's a real threat on humanity.
And one last point that has been talked about, and I find it very interesting in the literal way: who feeds the world? Uriel talked about these terms, and Mamadou mentioned 30% of food that goes through this industrial and global food system. So we need to look at where food is and what kind of farms are used. If you take the farms that are smaller than 5 hectares, which seems small to us, so they represent half of the world's production. And so it's much less, it's far from the image of massive farming systems. And if we take the example of Asia, it's very different. So it's very different from the vision that we have in Europe. Small farmers in India that produce an incredible quantity of food, not to the benefit of all citizens in India, because that's the country. India is the country where you are most likely to die from starvation. So the distribution of food has to be a question, and the first cause to this are these unbalances. Thank you very much. There's another question. Should agriculture stop using the industrial sector to grow?
Est-ce que c'est une question qui parle à l'un de nos panélistes?
Is it something that you'd like to talk about? I'm talking to our panelists. Well, this is a very broad question. I can try and answer it. Well, the expectation is yes, we expect a yes to this answer, to this question, but we should also identify the diversity of the agricultural types that we have, and it would neglect the fact that we need to change a lot of things in our systems. And that's exactly what you were describing, Mariam and Mamadou, with all these industries that want to deprive some countries and some communities from what they have. So these patterns still exist. So there's a huge work to be done, and there's a true work to be done in order to engage these stakeholders in this transition. We cannot only rely on local farming. The question of food sovereignty also relies on the question of providing food as a common good, and at the same time looking around us and try to see what can compete with this. And so we need to strike the right balance. And of course, the question of industrialization and of thinking scheme that has inherited all these mechanisms from the industrialization period. But what I mean is that there are ongoing things right now. And of course, we need to be as firm as possible, and we need to push these initiatives. And we need to also support local work and these local initiatives, and acknowledge their value for the benefit of all. And I might not have answered the question as it was expected, but it's a very broad question. And I think it's very interesting to look at the diversity and the diversity of activities, and to repeat that one and only pattern and model is absolutely impossible. Having only one model is absolutely impossible. So we need to look at different options and different levels, and to see what happens locally and to support what happens locally. And that's probably related to that question, but do you want to add something? Otherwise, I wanted to add up and to jump into that question. Well, I think that Muriel reacted well to the question. Well, let's say that this question is really broad, and it can be interpreted in many ways. Once more, if we want to talk about industrialization, what kind of industrialization are we talking about? That's probably the right question. So we need to give back the control of crops, because otherwise 6 or 7 companies will be at the heart of all of this, and they will make money thanks to that system. And then the local farmers will be disrupted and destabilized economically, socially, and politically. So we should not conceive this notion of industrialization in an archaic way. If we want people to keep using the daba, which is an agricultural tool, of course there's an ongoing modernization that has started. But this is, let's say, a controlled evolution, because these techniques are under control and they do not disrupt the way we control our resources. If industrialization allows 6 firms to control all the crops and to make the common good their own, this kind of industrialization should stop, because we can produce in another way with controlled tools and controlled type of technology, so that we can feed the world in a sustainable way. So if we can try and bring in innovation, we cannot get rid of industrialization, of course, because this creates the tools for our transformation. And this allows us to go faster and to get faster access for people in the cities to get food. And also, otherwise, this will have an impact on our health and on our access to food. And this will allow us to become to get back our food sovereignty, and to try and make business, so to speak, in the most ethical way, and to try and be as independent as possible in these patterns, economically, politically, and socially speaking. So that's why I just mentioned depriving people from their resources. No, but the concept of industrialization that allows us to innovate and move forward. Of course, we would like to keep developing that kind of technologies that will help us to have access to energy. That's what was mentioned just earlier. Of course, we need that kind of technology in order to move forward but in a pattern that allows food sovereignty. Well, thank you very much. The third question here from our audience is the following. What are the new aspects of food sovereignty and of food by itself? How can this be define the new market?
Maybe, sorry, if I can jump in here. Before the panelists address that question, I have a question I would like Mariam to come back and address, because related to what we've discussed recently, about the fact that 30% of smallholder farmers use 30% of resources and feed 70% of the world. Industrial agriculture uses 70% of resources, that of finance, land and chemicals and everything, and then feeds only 30% of the world. Now, if this kind of statistics is generally known and acceptable, and we hear about it over and over again, what shall we do to ensure that support goes to those who actually feed the world? I would like to hear Marianne's opinion on that, and then we can go to the next question.
Okay, look, I think that for us, it's too simplistic to look at who feeds who. For us in Africa, we are looking at things very differently. There was a very important question posed earlier on about how do we see ourselves decolonizing Africa? The question is not about decolonizing Africa only. Africa's colonialism is inextricably linked with the global architecture. Africa's decolonization will depend on the whole of the global economic architecture changing, because a cynical part of us, and this is not only me, many African activists, view the current global architecture's longevity, sustainability is dependent on the extent to which our conflicts continue, the extent to which we have no democratic governments, the extent to which our resources continue to be extracted and plundered. So for us, when we talk about, for example, agribusiness, we can't rail only against industrial agriculture and agribusiness, because agribusiness is inextricably linked, for example, to phosphate exploitation and the conflict in Western Sahara, in the exploitation of phosphate in Ethiopia. So for us, the issues are very inextricably linked, and we will not allow it to be compartmentalized. To do that is to fragment our struggles. That's the first thing. The second thing is that NGOs from the North have supported social movements, and some have destroyed them by neutralizing us, by providing a lot of funding to support the agendas of Northern NGOs. So there's a lot of issues that we need to unpack also in the social movements. So for us, we want to go back again to systemic issues, because a lot of us have looked at the state of the world, the environment, and we know the current development model is ecocidal. Not only ecocidal, it's genocidal. So the question is that there has to be, for us in this pandemic, this moment, a global recovery plan. How are we going to survive 10, 15, 20, 30 years into the future? Are we going to continue on this current trajectory? We are doomed if we do that. So it's not just a question of looking at Africa. We are inextricably tied to the global economy, to each other. No other moment in time has shown us how interconnected we are as this moment in the pandemic, as we are all in our lockdowns. So going back again, we need to look at the systemic issues and we need to address them, and we have to look at the question of resource exploitation. This cannot continue. We cannot allow it. We cannot allow all this gas, mineral exploitation to continue, the deforestation. We cannot afford it. It's destroying our ecological base. It's given rise to fall armyworm infestation. It's made us vulnerable to shock after shock after shock. How can we survive as Africans under these conditions? And I'm shouting because we're so angry. So the thing is, we need to go back to those trade agreements, to the unequal trade. It's about the unequal relationship between Africa and the rest of the world. And I'm speaking here up for Africa, and the issue of the future of farming and food systems in Africa, they are inextricably linked with what I said. Indebtedness, illicit financial flows, extractivism, the global economy, and the relationships between our governments and each of our colonial masters. I mean, look at Francophone Africa. Francophone Africa's relationship with France. It's completely colonial. Come on, we can all see it. I mean, how can we not unpack all of this? If we're really serious about building a new world, we all will have to change. We will have to transition out of the system. Africa we cannot afford it anymore. People from Latin America will have a similar thing to say, because we feel, and I'm going to be very honest with you all, that people in the global south, the black and brown people, are paying the price, not only for this pandemic, but for the ecological debt that we all have to pay every day. I can't put on my camera because we're still impacted by another cyclone that hit us. And so, I'm just saying that there's a lot of work to do. Muriel understands, she said this, a lot of work to do. And we have to be very, very committed to working together in social movements on equal partnerships between the North and the South. And, in this time of the pandemic, especially this year, I get a lot of, the people from the North are reaching out. They want to assist. They want to. I mean, we can't do this alone. We need those partnerships. So we are still saying we need to look at the systemic issues that are driving our resource poorness, that are keeping us in this neo-colonial relationships vis-a-vis even each other, even in South Africa. We still feel that we're benefiting from the exploitation of our neighbors, for example. So we're all, at some moments, colonialists, and some moments, laboring under a common neocolonialism. And I think we all need to be honest about that. So, yeah, I'll leave it there, Nnimmo. I hope that I answered your question. As you can see, we are much more interested in linking up the food discussion with the deforestation, with the extractivism, with debt, illicit financial flows. And there's a lot of momentum being generated by social movements around the UN World Food System Summit, UN Food System Summit. There's a lot of work being done there. We need to support the social movements who are outside of that process. So there's a lot of work being done by good people around the world. Every issue is covered. People are working on oil, gas, pipelines, deforestation, everything. The issue is for convergence and recovery plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. You really brought everything together because we can't treat these issues in silos. They're all so deeply interwoven. And food itself it's a very complex thing. It's not just one item that we take on the plate. Food is life, and everything about life affects how food is produced and how food is used. So all these political forces and all the pressures and infrastructures and architectures, they all have a role to play, and all the interrelationship with geopolitics and the colonial and imperial systems, they all reflected very heavily on the food systems. And I think this has been very interesting, the way you're unpacking it. And so I would leave it to Lucas to introduce the next question again, to refresh,
Peut-être avant,
so that you can have comments from other panelists. Thank you.
Oui, peut-être pour revenir à...
So maybe to go back to the title, the roots of exploitation of resources at the urban school, we always have to focus on the issues from an urban viewpoint. Could we make a link between the farming systems in cities when exploiting the resources?
Can I jump on?
Oui.
Non, je pense qu'il y a vraiment des liens assez
I think there are strong connections because we can see a series of extraction of production elements. It's because that cities are bigger. We've got the argument when we see the evolution of arguments in Africa when cities started to eat the farming land and the production space have reduced. The food habits have changed in cities, and the question is, should we forbid some resources and produce on the market? So the evolution of cities have changed the different schemes. For instance, rice consumption, that is a product that ruins many ecosystems when being produced, is bought by cities. In Mali, 93% of the rice is produced in the country. And when we connect this with the poverty issue and the consumption systems, Mali today, covering 93% of its needs, will import from Thailand 23-24% of the rest, because urban centers want a better price and also the type of rice they want. So the imbalance of the production system and the city management today. But some territories have understood the way policies should be designed in order for micro-policies on the territories should be sustainable, good for protection, and stop the accumulation of wealth. So we cannot speak about sustainable production food production system. That's why in Mali, what we've used for our land policies in Mali, many countries have rural land policies. In Mali, we also have farming land policies, because we know that also the urban farming activity should be introduced in the farming policies. There is we cannot dissociate the role of cities in organizing or reorganizing the food system. They should be introduced in the market management, and the role of the cities is how to territorialize this reflection nationally and in solidarity and in partnership between countries. This is one first element I want to share. Second thing, should we prohibit some products on the market? Protecting a product is not the same thing as prohibiting it, because if there's a connection between the protection and consumption systems, this connection is the market, and the market is also managed by territorial communities, transfrontier, transborder markets, and they are on a territory, and there's a connection between the products and the consumption systems. So if you prohibiting is not the right thing to do, but protecting is the right thing. Wheat and sorghum are the first cereals to be bought, then rice. So cities have a very important role to play. Thank you. Muriel, can I take the floor? I definitely agree with what has been said. We are also worried everywhere in Europe about losing farming land, and also because cities were close to fertile land, and now that cities are expanding, they occupy farming land. So we've got a situation where the farming land are scattered around. So it's very important for cities to also manage its own farming activity, because this is an element of sustainability in the future. And if we're speaking about regulation of food products, it is very touchy, so we can regulate some dangerous products, but a stronger regulation is always somehow dangerous because it affects the food habits, and affecting food habits could have consequences that could be negative. So you also have this thought you have to keep in mind when managing the legal food framework from the producer to the consumer. This is a very complex task. We've also seen that some food information was not as efficient as we expected. So ruling on food or food products or food consumption is not always the best way to act. Thank you. And my question for you, Muriel, Nnimmo started with this. What is the role of food technology? I think it's a very tense debate now. So can we have a reasonable approach to this debate when you were speaking about who feeds or who will feed the planet with more adverse conditions in comparison with the ones of the conventional farming activity. I know how to be more relaxed in this debate, being more open-minded about what could be suggested. You were speaking of synthetic meat. These products will have to be thought over. But we know that investigation research on synthetic food, synthetic meat started a long time ago. And we're speaking about this now more than before. So this type of innovation has been studied for a long time. So I wouldn't like to speak only about technologies or transformed or processed products. We have to co-build the orientation of the technological proposals. And as a matter of fact, we've got many schemes at our disposal, but we also have the same way of thinking. We think about efficiency, we think about processed food, and sometimes we have the feeling that it goes the other way we would like to go. And today it is important that, no, this is the time we have to dedicate to designing proposals that have to be sustainable and that will be able to lead us towards diversity of proposals, diversity. The key point is to keep this openness and this diversity of proposals. I'm not sure I've given you the answer you wanted. No, it's always interesting actually to listen to you. You opening up the debate. Nnimmo, would you like to also to add something?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, let me thank all the panelists for very challenging comments. I think that we've got a lot of food for thought, and it's just as well because we're talking about food. So we're feeding our thoughts and feeding our imaginations and getting ready to act. The challenge about one of the big issues I think we've skirted on, we've spoken about and brought up today is that food has been treated over time as a mere commodity. And because food is treated as a mere commodity, we forget about the cultural element in food. We forget about the political aspects of food. We forget about the whole social elements around food, the issues of liberty, issues of choice. And farmers, small-scale farmers across the world, especially in the global south, are losing territory, they're becoming farm hands, are becoming laborers in the farm, and they're being so poorly treated. People are farming carbon instead of farming food. People are planting plantations that are seen as carbon sinks to fight global warming, but displacing farmers from growing food to growing such items. And then we really do know that it's all is built upon fiction. The fiction that trees can absorb carbon in perpetuity. That does not happen. And so trees could absorb carbon for, let me say, a very long living tree. 1 million years after that tree is going to die and rot, and the carbon is going to be released. But because we're looking for long-term imaginations and long-term solutions, short-term solutions and short-term imaginations, because we're looking for how to make money from every sector. And because the financial institution must keep on moving funds to the hands of the powerful into transnational corporations, concentrating power in the hands of a few corporations and a few individuals owning all the land and grabbing the land, speculators. This has brought about very painful and negative political and social realities, which needs to be changed. And so the question who feeds the planet is actually, to me, a call for radical transformation of the unequal relationships and unjust relationships in the agricultural sector as well as in the overall land sector. Because the agricultural system that destroys the soil, destroys biodiversity, cannot really be lighting the way to the future. And this is one thing I believe we all need to think collectively and fight collectively.
Merci beaucoup. Une question qui avait été posée un peu plus
Thanks a lot. A question that was asked very early, and that could be a conclusion for our debate. How could we be better heard? How could small farmers be better heard? What is the political area that could make them more visible, maybe globally or nationally, whatever you want?
I think Mamadou wants to answer that.
Okay. So I will jump on that one. So how can we ensure that small...
Donc, comment garantir que...
I think that it starts with at different levels. Actually, we have more spaces for smallholder farmers organizations. They even have some umbrella organizations at the continental level that need to be considered and then to be promoted by at all levels first. If you go to West Africa, you have ROPA operating at the West African level. You have EIF, East African Farmers Federation. You have ProPac from Central Africa. You have even Sakawa is a bit different from smallholder farmers, but there are some UNAC.
We're not hearing Mamadou.
Can you hear me?
En tout cas, on vous entend à Lyon.
Okay. So
Mamadou is heard in Lyon. We can hear Mamadou in Lyon. Can you hear him?
Mamadou, je vous propose de terminer.
Mamadou, I suggest you finish your answer while we wait for reestablishing the connection with Nnimmo.
So there is a need just to consider this, to support the organizations at that level, support from them. And secondly, also there are some public places like the CFS, the Committee for Food Security, that is also at FAO level, but bringing all these people just to ensure that the participation is secure at that level. And also to help, I think, drawing the capacities for these groups to just access to some kind of information, and then also helping them to develop some key strategic planning systems, or that will take into account their own position on this kind of thing. So capacity building, giving them space at national level, but also developing some international arenas where they can operate will be a good thing. And there is a sign that things are moving in a good way. You have organizations like La Via Campesina, ROPA, with ProPac, and are operating actually at international level. So it's very useful to support them with specific programs so that the capacity can be built and then also strengthened at all different levels. Yeah, this is what I can say.
Merci beaucoup pour cette réponse.
Thanks a lot for your answer and this passionate debate. So the two coming sessions, tomorrow session from 2 to 4 p.m. and Thursday 4:30, 6:30, Green Colonialism in the framework of the seminar organized by Nnimmo Bassey. Thanks a lot and have a nice evening.
Merci beaucoup, bonne soirée.
Merci à vous. Merci.
Thank you all. Have a great evening or a great morning, wherever you may be. Thank you for such a rich conversation.